How are you, man?
Good, how are you, my man?
Pretty good. Are you a nurse, a doctor?
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
That's a slogan, we should put that on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Oh man, I came home so smelly last night.
What could you possibly mean?
So we caught up last night a bit randomly, and you're a little bit like a one of those dodgy like salesmen with like a whole bunch of product in their suit jacket.
Packing the prototype inside the suit jacket, yeah. No, well, what Andy's referring to is my latest obsession, which is fragrances. All right, so I've recently found the joy of fragrance, and this is actually quite an about turn for me because my experience with perfumes, being choked out by Red Door or Chanel Number 5 from old ladies, right? And I've always I've never liked it. Fragrance is really big sometimes in Asian communities and aunties and things like that, and I never really appreciated it. So when we met up, I had a few little test tubes, vials on me, and we did a bit of a connoisseur's taste test, just to see which one, a bit of field testing.
So, I mean, look, okay, it might have been a bit of fun in the moment, but don't you think, like, where's your shame, man? Like, seriously, like you carry these vials of fragrances, and you told me that you had done an A/B test with 20 people that night already. Like, what the hell? Like, you would have got kicked out of the pub, man, because it was I was one test case, and like I was stinking the place out.
Yeah, well, it was an outdoor place, so that's probably quite important in this scenario. That actually we weren't trapped in a room with a bunch of other people. It was like outdoors. But hey, it was kind of I mean, whatever. It was a bit fun. I think people, you know what it is to me, why I'm attracted to it. It's the same thing as like wine or whiskey tasting, right? It's like if you think about all these pretentious, highfalutin, like look at the notes. Can you taste cheese and shortbread in this wine or whatever? It's the same kind of thing, I think, with fragrances that actually like people like doing it. It's fun because you're testing the limits of what you can actually sense, right? Versus what you think you can smell. And yeah, I find it quite interesting, right? Because unlike wine and other things like that, you can actually smell. You actually can smell different things a lot clearer when you sample fragrances.
I do think there's maybe like a certain level of I don't know, interest in the. I don't know if Epicurean is the right word, but like to kind of, test the limits of your own sense of different things, and maybe that is part of it. But I've never been into, like,
well, okay. But you were into, when I wasn't actually into this at all, and it's very like a Johnny Come Lately obsession. You were actually quite into your fragrances when it came to like soaps, luxury soaps, and house-based fragrances and things like that from your love of luxury experiences in hotels. So I think, like, how can you like that but not like fragrances?
I think it's the association. So I think when it's not the fragrance itself even necessarily, as opposed to this smells like Aesop as opposed to Pinot Clean. You know what I mean? Like this is like an elite level fragrance or smell in whatever the product is. And like, it's true. Like you go into the lobby of a 5-star hotel or, even like an upmarket sort of office building or whatever, they just smell good. Like they've paid attention to that. And it feels premium. It feels like you're up there. You've made it, right? Because you're in that, you can smell that smell. And I think that's for me what it is, rather than like an intrinsic sort of, like I'm the guy who would drink Grange, not because I like the taste of Grange, but just because it's like $800 a bottle.
Yeah. But there is something, like there is a stigma about men that wear fragrances, right? Like too much cologne or whatever it may be.
But you took it to the next level because you had like vials and you were like, I think I had to try 3 different ones last night. And you know, I had to take a photo of you spraying me so that my wife didn't think that we were getting up to mischief that night. So
did it choke out your wife when you went home?
Actually, you know what? I got home after she'd already gone to bed. So, you know, I managed to evade that side of it, you know, after showering and all that stuff. But I must admit, my clothes still reek.
They still smell?
Yeah.
See, that's a good perfume right there. The performance.
But I didn't like. I must admit, like I don't have good associations. Like it's not like, oh, good, I can smell that smell again. I've got, oh shit, I can smell that smell again. You know, like it's I don't know. It left me with a sense of like it being really artificial, right? So, you know, like I like. I'm going to say I like smell, but like smell is, you know, often synonymous with like a bad smell, right? But like I like, you know, just general, I wouldn't call them fragrances, but like I like, you know, smell is like an important sense for me, right? So I do like, you know, when you go past like a nice restaurant or you smell something like food that's, you know, amazing, or even like the natural environment. Like, I don't know if you've ever, well, you know, where I'm sort of commuting to, like sometimes, you know, you get off the train and it's near water, and you get off the train and you can smell like salt water, and it's like, I love that. Like, so, and even like the smells after like it's storming or whatever, you know, you get that. I don't know what that smell is, but it's like this, you know, it always has a particular smell after rain, right? I love all of that stuff, right? But fragrances, like as in the, you know, the ones from, you know, Chemist Warehouse, they're just so like artificial. I don't know. I'm just not into it. I'm not into it.
Yeah, you know, fair enough. I wasn't into it either, but now I am. So, and it's funny, like, because whatever you're into, there is a community out there, and there's parts of the internet that dedicate, you know, there's content creators that just talk about this stuff. They're just fragrance content creators.
So have you added Old Spice to your collection yet?
No, I haven't gone that far, right? Because what happens with all these Epicurean pretentious kind of pursuits, right? There's a pattern. It starts with exploring the hits, but then quickly moving to further and further levels of accessibility, right? Whether it's, you know, whiskey, whether it's wine, whether it's fragrances, the goal is to become so evolved or so high cultured that you're wearing something that only a true fragrance lover would love, which means everyone else hates it. Or drinking a whiskey that is so peaty and smoky that it's almost unpalatable to the average person. And that's the badge of honor that you have inside your own niche community. And I think that's kind of what happens with fragrance as well. So people do like that kind of Old Spice, but like a, you know, more upmarket version of that. But the reality is that that's not popular with the masses anymore.
So you got to move above A tier and get into Tony Soprano tier. Is that what you're saying?
My dad had we had actually a bottle of Old Spice in the original porcelain bottle, and my dad had that on the dresser for most of my childhood. It was definitely a staple back then.
All right. Well, in other news, we had a development in the Sam Kerr case. So she was found not guilty, and we discussed the Sam Kerr matter last week.
I thought she was guilty though of being a mole.
Oh yeah, no, that trial is coming up. No, like she was found not guilty. Like I don't know that there was any kind of commentary from the court or the judge relating to it necessarily. I don't know if that's their role to do that, but I haven't read it if they did. But you know, it was good to see last week a flurry of articles, I think echoing what I think is the right position, which is that like the police really, like, you know, either the police force or the Crown Prosecutor or what do they call it? The public prosecutions, whatever the, you know, body that takes those forward.
Yeah.
You know, like an abuse of that, and the cop, you know, himself knowing what to say to get her like charged and ultimately for this court case to proceed. Like, I don't know, there was a lot of articles sort of pointing to some of that, so that was good to see.
Yeah. Look, I think that you'll find it'll be interesting to see whether this verdict helps soften the PR blow for Kerr. And I think it will, because ultimately people do want to get behind her, and there's so much goodwill for women's soccer, right, in Australia especially. So I think that it's in everyone's best interest to find a way where this is not so bad for Sam Kerr. But all I can tell you is that there was quite a pile on social media, all the outlets that I read when the video was released, the body cam video, and it was almost universally like over 90% of the commentators were slamming her, right? And nothing to do with the grounds of what the police officer should have done or not, but just her own behavior. And I think that's what she'll be fighting against here, because there's, like I said before, there's many ways to lose an encounter. OJ was found not guilty too, but it didn't really matter in the end.
What are you saying? The glove didn't fit?
It was the cotton gloves. It was the cotton gloves, the liners. But you know what I mean? So, she I think she would be smart enough, well, maybe not after seeing that body cam, but to know that it doesn't really matter what the verdict was. The damage is kind of done. So I think she'll kind of keep her head down now for a bit and focus on the pitch. All
right. Well, speaking of social media incidents, to top that, probably the biggest social media incident I can remember in certainly for 2025, let's at least call it that, was for anyone who is either living under a rock in Australia or isn't from Australia to be exposed to what happened. Two nurses who worked for a hospital here in Sydney were on, I don't know exactly what the app is or what it is, but it's some sort of a thing that connects you randomly to strangers, and you just
like Omegle or something like that. For people our age, it's probably Chat Roulette. It's probably like one of the early versions of this, except with video.
Yeah, so it was just like a random, connects two random people basically. This Israeli influencer or social media guy, his whole thing, I don't know anything about him other than what happened here, but basically he randomly goes and connects with people and he has a conversation with them, records it, and then if there's something worthwhile, he uploads it to his channel. That's what I understand he does. He got connected to these two nurses in Sydney, and initially, like when they connect like to these people in the hospital, like in their scrubs, and they at first it's like a friendly encounter, like, hey, how's it going, la da da da, and then it comes to say, oh, where are you from? And then the Israeli influencer says, oh, I'm from Israel. And then initially it's a guy, and then this other, like a female nurse, gets in on it, and they start saying quite very horrible things, anti-Semitic things that also not just actually, for me, it wasn't just that it was anti-Semitic. It was actually worse than that. It was actually violent. And it was actually content which undermines what you would expect from health professionals, and it crossed many lines, not just the anti-Semitic line. Yeah,
it was a bit of a train wreck. I think no matter what angle you come in, when you see the clip and you hear it, is quite vile, and it's because of that cocktail of making it is very racially charged, ethnically charged, and there were threats. So pretty much saying that if a Jewish person comes in, I wouldn't treat them. In fact, I would kill them. And the second nurse says, you don't know how many Israeli dogs have come through here, and makes a motion of slitting a throat and saying, I'll send them to hell. So it was pretty extreme, but there were a few things that were shocking as well. Like, they're breaking lots of rules. They're doing it whilst at work, or at the very least in their work uniforms, in their hospital scrubs, which is, you've got to say, a pretty, it's a rookie move when you're going to use this kind of language. My first impressions too were like, is this real? Is this some kind of skit or some strange setup? And I think that the latter of those are probably still not really known. Like how much, I think a lot of people watching it are trying to scratch their head and said, how much of this was a setup?
I don't think it was a setup. It absolutely wasn't a setup. That's not an unknown variable. It wasn't a setup.
No. When I say setup, I mean how much of it was the Israeli content, content guy trying to manufacture this outcome and not truly shocked. So it was just trying to get it on camera, right?
Sure.
That's what I mean. So not
Okay. And just to that point, there was a comment about something to that effect. And then the full video was released, and unless it's doctored in some kind of way, the full video doesn't seem to corroborate that perspective.
No. And I think that's the thing, right? Like the unedited video makes it even feel more authentic in my mind, that actually it turned on a dime based on these racial prejudice and triggers. So look, the short stories, I mean, this has all happened very fast, and it has been responded to quite quickly by the authorities and by the ministers. The two nurses have been stood down, no longer working for the hospital, and a thorough case investigation just to make sure that, I mean, when you make a threat that you will actively harm Jewish patients, and that you have, now the health board has to investigate all these cases, right? And so they're in the process of doing that and going through, even if it was, as they've claimed, a joke or something, right? But gee, isn't this a lesson, like a 101 perfect storm of how to get yourself cancelled?
Well, I think they'll be more than cancelled. So how do we take a middle take on this? Like, what's the angle? Like, how do we, like, I don't think there really is like two sides to this equation, really, objectively, in terms of what they said and how deplorable it was, and how, just, you don't want that. Like, there's no two sides of that story, but there's some other angles to this, or there's some other things that maybe we could explore. So what's for you, what's the middle discussion to have about this, other than like spitting outrage at it? Yeah,
I think the danger to commentating on this particular incident is the risk of just joining the pylon because it feels good, and seeing some street justice kind of form of, play out before your eyes. And the second is not respecting the gravity of the situation, right? So let me tell you on one side. Let's have a look at it on one side, right? And I think whenever it comes to these really sensitive issues, everyone is on eggshells trying to work out, what's Andy and Roger's position, so I can then either support it or take it apart. But let's kind of go external to us a bit, right? So today I was at a cafe, and like you said, this is a very viral incident. It's doing the rounds in Sydney. And there were these two ladies within earshot of me having their morning coffee. It's somewhat in a business park, just normal kind of people. And they were talking about the incident, and they pretty much said, they were very much standing by and supporting these two nurses. And they were saying, well, what do you expect? They've seen all the horrors. They work in health. They're sensitive to all the pain that the Israelis have caused and the destruction and so on. Understand the frustration and the stuff. And they even brought in they can say what they want. It's free speech, and I don't support them losing their job and things like that. So that was quite shocking to me to hear that response. But like I said to you, I think earlier in the week, it doesn't surprise me that there will be support or even some form of celebration of this activity by certain communities, just because of how polarized this whole thing has become between Israel and Palestine and all this kind of stuff. So that's one piece there. So I want to get your reaction to that. Like, overhearing that at 9 o'clock in the morning at a Sydney cafe with normal middle classy kind of corporate workers, does that surprise you?
I think what that is like a reaction against the pylon, right? It's and I think that kind of a conversation wasn't really an interrogation of like the words spoken and whether they were right or wrong or whatever, but rather, well, we need to show solidarity for our people, right? As in people who are on our side of this, debate and this war, whatever. And I think, one of the things we've seen from like time and time again when it comes to Israel and, the conflict in the Middle East is the difficulty in passing like anti-Semitic sentiments from political sentiments. So if you rewind 20 years ago and you go to say the Iraq War, there would have been anti-Americanism like in the same way as there's now, a lot of people critical of Israel. And it does bleed into the people. It does bleed into criticizing a group of people, because people shortcut their views of the political situation to, that's just that bubble or that group of people, right? And that bleeds into, citizens of that country. And when you're talking about, like, I guess Israel is an ethno-state, really, it's a Jewish state, that gets confused, or the two get mixed together. And the problem with that is there are a lot of Jewish people who've got nothing to do with the decisions of the Israeli government. So, I think the conversation you overheard, I think, was a very naive conversation. I think in their minds, that conversation on whatever that platform was with that random guy from Israel, like, in their minds, let's put like to one side, the fact that they're like medical, professionals working in a hospital whose job is to, like,
they've taken the Hippocratic oath.
Yeah, like let's just park that, because that's like that there's absolutely zero way you can defend these people, just to be clear. But like, I think that kind of conversation you were talking about, what I think they were sort of in their minds, sort of when they talk about, say, free speech, right? I think what they're saying is, oh yeah, of course you should be able to criticize Israel. I think that's what they probably meant, right? Assuming they were reasonable people at the end of the day. Maybe they're not reasonable people, I don't know. But if they are reasonable people, I think they're just confused. I think they're confused people.
All right. Okay. Let me just play you one more that's been doing the rounds, actually, some street interviews that have been happening after the fact. So let me just play this for you.
They have a free right to say whatever they want,
But is it wrong to say that?
I stand with them.
You stand with them?
Yes.
In what way?
In any way possible.
You stand with the fact that someone has threatened to kill and not treat a Jewish patient?
All right, and what about all the kids that Jews have killed? Israel's killing kids in Palestine, and people here obviously hurt all around the world. Look what they did in Lebanon as well.
So a fair bit of whataboutism there.
Absolutely, but I think this is where we're at, and I think the problem is at the moment that, okay, there is one side of the community that's feeling that, and like you said, it's a bit of a naive or not very sophisticated way of expressing their feelings, but there is some kind of trauma there that is creating this reaction. Like you said, well, what about all these other atrocities, right? Like, and I think the problem has always been when these things happen, you need the middle. We talked about trying to find the middle. You need the middle of that community to come out aggressively and condemn the situation, the actions, the words. And you just don't get that when these things happen, right? And I think that's part of the problem, that you should get that part of, say, the Islamic community coming out in Sydney and saying, hey, or the peak bodies saying 100% zero tolerance for this, we condemn it, okay? And that has nothing to do with what's going on and our position in Palestine and Gaza.
My only warning on that is don't be so sure they haven't, because I have no knowledge of any groups from any community that have come out and said as such. So I don't have any direct knowledge of it. I have heard about, like, the union for nurses have come out very clearly, against what happened. But it's not always from, like, the front page sexy headline that multi-faith group comes out in support of Jewish people in relation to these comments. Like, the fact that we don't know about it doesn't mean it hasn't happened, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So now, as I said, I don't know if it has. I don't know. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe I couldn't tell you. But the fact that it's not reported on, like, absence of evidence isn't always evidence of absence. And I think that's where you've got to be careful with this general line, right?
Yeah, I agree, right? And it's still early days. That might be coming. But I think that's what's needed. Is what I'll say first.
But you definitely have a lot of confused people on the street, including the one that you just played, but also the ones you overheard, about, like, the nuances of all this stuff, right? But I want to now touch on, like, the pylon itself, right? And, there's been quite a bit that's followed. Like, they've obviously been stood down, as they should have been. They will lose their jobs, and they should also lose their careers, because at the end of the day, you can't trust them anymore.
It compromises the system.
Like, you can't. If someone's got those thoughts in their head, you just can't. Like, if you're an employer, you have a duty of care to your patients, and you can't risk your patients when you have people who don't respect what their job is. Right? Essentially, that's what I heard in this social media clip. But at what point is there a duty of care to the two nurses who they went on this? Well, I don't know that they knew that they were being recorded. I think they probably exercised extremely poor judgment, but it's like the equivalent I would say is like, imagine if your deepest, most darkest, most horrific, innermost thought that you've ever had were broadcast to the world, right? What the impact on you would be. And in some ways, that's like a version of what happened, not as extreme as that, but like it's a version of what happened in the sense that they thought they were having a private exchange, like with a guy, like almost like a flame war on like an online forum or something where everyone's like faceless, or you're beeping the shit out of some guy who cut you off in a car or something. Like there's this certain kind of, I don't actually have to be respectable in this situation. Like, and I think there was part of that which dialed up, like amplified the aggression that they had. And I don't think it was a joke. I mean, it wasn't a funny joke, but I don't know that I took out of that they genuinely meant what they said. Like I didn't, in listening to it, I don't genuinely believe that if an Israeli person came into that hospital that they'd be, refusing them care. Like I don't believe that would happen, even though they said it. So I guess then to fast forward a couple of days later, so I think, I don't know, I haven't followed the specifics, but I did read a story that the female nurse had like panic attacks and might be on the verge of going to hospital. And then I read earlier today that the male nurse has gone to hospital. Like they're actually now concerns for their welfare because this has gone global, right? And just to be clear, like this question is not in any way to defend it, but you've got talks of, like I guess like questions asked about how did they become citizens, right? Or at least how did one of them become a citizen? And when you've just lost your job, you've just lost your career, you've lost you're now this pariah in the community. This is going to have mental health impacts like this. Well, this could affect their mental health. This could there's a whole range of like flow-on consequences. So divorcing the actual, I guess what I'm trying to say, like in some cases you can have pity for someone on death row, right? That can be a thing. So yeah, where should the limits of this pylon be?
Yeah, I think it's so much worse nowadays with social media and just browsing through the different platforms. There's some incredibly vile comments towards them as people, like you said, calls for them to be deported or all sorts of harm to be, I've seen horrible comments, wishing them all sorts of suffering. And I do think that you have to keep a sense of proportionality. You need a zero tolerance stance on the behavior and that there will be consequences. But I think that it goes back to this idea of proportionality as well, right? Like, should they be what punishment is befitting of this kind of crime? And I think that's a really tough question to ask, and it also says something about what people want out of the theater of this, right? People want to watch things burn, right, for entertainment. And it also comes at a time where it leverages off the instability that's happening globally in this area. And egged on by even things like Trump, where it's much more of a game on attitude around deportations and this idea of like this us and them, right? So I do think that have to be careful with that, and I think the instinct to pile on is very, very strong, and society would do better if most of us actually just let that pass over us, right? Because I think that at the end of the day, it is possible to separate the act or the behavior from the humans underneath. And I think that is the best way to deal with this, right? Like in a really childish way. And I know that it's very hard to do this. It's kind of like when your kid does something bad. They're not bad kids. They did a bad thing, right? And that's incredibly hard to do so close to the incident and when the crime is so brazen. But like you said, they didn't know they were being recorded. They probably didn't know it was going to be shared. So there's a range of things in here that I think you go back to some kind of proportionality. So say if the end outcome is they actually do choose some kind of physical harm to themselves, you'd have to say that is not proportional, right? That is not what anyone would want. Anyone who has a clear mind would think is a just kind of cause to this.
That reminds me of the incident that happened maybe, I don't know, would have been around a decade ago now, where you had I think it might have been Kate was in as in Kate, Princess, what's her name? Princess Catherine?
Kate Middleton?
Yeah. No, well, she's not Middleton anymore. Anyway, the one, not the nasty one, Meghan Markle, but the other, but Kate. Anyway.
She's still Kate Middleton.
Not Middleton. No, she's like, what do you mean she's Kate Middleton? No.
Yeah, they don't have last names. They just have titles.
Yeah, exactly. She's Kate, the Princess of Wales. Is she the Princess of Wales? Anyway, I don't want to get into that. She was in a hospital. There was like there was these two Aussie radio hosts. They called the hospital. There was a midwife, I think, of the hospital, and they pretended, I think, to be the Queen or something like that. And the midwife sort of fell for it and gave some information out that they shouldn't have. And this was all this hilarious thing on FM radio here in either Sydney or I don't know if they were from Sydney. Anyway, and obviously this was this moment of shame and horror and embarrassment for this midwife in the UK, and she suicided over it. So like this kind of shit does happen from this extreme pressure and attention. And I guess the last thing I want to say in relation to the actual, these two, nurses is just to say that, the judgment that they deserve should come in time. It should, like, whatever we think now, like collectively is the right thing to do to these people right now, just as like, we're not going to get the right answers now. So everyone's going to like jump at these, like, you see politicians sort of wanting to one up each other saying, oh, that's not, that's
you
not
think this guy's tough on crime.
I'm tougher. And, the incentive framework there is that they're going to get overpunished, right? So for whatever the proportionality, to your point, like wherever that kind of actual situation or sweet spot is, right? It's going to go beyond that, right? So time is the best, I think, ingredient here to maybe just let this all die down and assess it at some point in the future, whoever that is. Whether, I mean, certainly their employers, but I don't know if there's a criminal aspect to this. There might be, and that should follow and be investigated.
I think the harder conversation is what follows, right? It's this kind of trope that how does racism exist in society? How does like anti-Semitic behavior and values kind of flow? And you'd be fooled for going through most of your life thinking that, it's just if you don't have a swastika on your chest, like American History X, or you're not some skinhead that doesn't have a normal job, is on the fringes of society, then yeah, you're probably not the kind of anti-Semite that I'm thinking of when I hear that word. But these views can exist under the skins of very, very normal people that walk amongst us with these kind of that don't share these views readily in most cases, right? And I think these are the tougher questions to grapple with, and I think that this is in the backdrop of rising anti-Semitic incidents in Australia. And if you are part of that Jewish community at the moment, yeah, you would feel very, very vulnerable, right? And I think that is really unfair because, like you said, they do not have a direct connection with what's happening in the Middle East, right? They should be unshackled or untethered from any of the responsibility of anything that the Israelis do or don't do, right? So,
just to be clear, even people in Israel, regular people in Israel,
correct,
should not. And it's not just because their government is, different to the people, so to speak, but rather just because, can't we all just get along? I don't know.
Can we both agree we both like hummus?
I do think, I sent you a video earlier in the week. It's the South Park episode where it's got, it's more than 10 years old, but it's like, it's some kind of fiction of peace in the Middle East where you've got, the Palestinians and the Israelis coming together under some new state or new banner or whatever. And then they've got all the logos of the major religions. So, Islam, Christianity and Judaism. And they go, okay, let's unite under one new logo. And then all the, features of the logo merge together into the Van Halen logo. And then like, how come Van Halen? And they start rocking, together to, Ain't Talking About Love. So yeah, that's what we need. We need some Van Halen to ooze the spirit of peace in the
They can all get behind Van Halen. but yeah, look, and I also think we spoke about Gaza and the radical kind of plans, or the blunt plans that Trump has for the area, or is claiming to have. And I think the biggest thing that comes to my mind is like, okay, think about these two nurses, right? So they've taken off the mask and shown some rather unsavory beliefs about Jewish people and the Israelis. What does the road back? What does like the road back to normal society look for them, right? How would you even begin? And you think about that problem, and there are no easy answers. Now think about a whole country like that, right? What is the plan
can I tell you
to
what the answer
de-radicalize?
is? For these two nurses, the answer is a $100,000 interview with 60 Minutes, where they both go on, and then they donate it to some, Jewish cultural center or the Jewish museum, the Holocaust Museum or something like that. The proceeds of that interview, they visit a synagogue, and they become agents of Mossad. That's the way forward back into society for these people.
You just, but with all seriousness, and I'm not saying that's not a bad idea actually, if we were in the PR game, but it's just impossible now. Like, what option is left for them other than to be a martyr, where the only people that now accept them are probably the most extreme of their community, and they end up being paraded at some anti-Semitic kind of rally. I think, and this is the problem, like when you don't provide a way for people to come back and rejoin society in some meaningful way, and you've got no thoughts on how to de-radicalize or whatever you want to call it, like what hope do you have, right? Like where that doesn't leave many options.
All right. Well, speaking of not leaving many options to rejoin society in a meaningful way, I think we should move to Donald Trump. So we've had a pretty whirlwind couple of weeks. We've obviously, we touched last week on the next Gold Coast in the Middle East, but there's been other things going on too. Some of the threads, seem to reach at their nadir in the previous week. Give me your 30-second elevator pitch take on what we experienced in the last week.
Look, I mean, there is so much going on, and so this, banning term of flooding the zone is definitely a strategy that's happening now. There are so many hard-hitting and viral stories in this area that the media and, as a result, the public are kind of spinning. They don't know what to cover and what's actually what you should react to, and with each headline seeming more outrageous than the last, it is very hard to know what to react to or what to cover. But I think for me, when I look at the last week and Gaza aside, because we've had a stab at that, I think this is about now the balancing pillars of the American government, right? And I think this idea of Congress, executive power, and then the judiciary, those three kind of keeping each other in check. Trump is I think the main thing for me is Trump is pushing that. They're testing it, right? Because Congress ain't doing nothing. The Democrats are so bludgeoned that they can't really do anything. So now it's really all falling back to the courts, right? And I think that when you look at some of the executive orders and what Trump is pushing, he's testing the limits of executive power. And it's sending the courts or the judiciary system into a frenzy, filing all sorts of injunctions and everything to try to put limits onto what he's saying. And some things have been blocked and some things haven't, but there's this real fear that even if the courts rule and say, hey, look, it's illegal to do this, you can't actually take away birthright citizenship, that there's nothing really stopping the executive from doing it anyway. And that's a bit of a fear that's going around, and it's not unfounded. I mean, Biden ignored that when it came to relieving student loans, right? It's just that is such an innocuous thing. People can kind of get behind that. But some of the stuff that Trump's talking about is way more extreme than that. So I think it's just that's a big piece. I think that this idea of what we spoke about in the election cycle coverage, that is it good? Like once you break some of these things, they're broken, and they take a long time to repair. If you slash certain government systems, they can be very slow to heal. And right now, is the right kind of care being taken when testing the system?
No. All right. So I'm going to rewind 6 months when we were having conversation about Trump, and we were saying, what's the problem with Trump? Why is he the worst thing ever? And why should we be really scared about Trump? And in fact, why is he a fascist? Ultimately, why is he a fascist? When people compare him and say he's a fascist, what are they actually referring to? And this is the stuff that this is what they're referring to. This we're going to recast the institution of the, like the Constitution. In fact, we're going to operate in an unconstitutional way because we don't give a fuck. And you know what? They're not going to stand up to us. And that's charting a really damaging course. So even if you think that the policies that they're trying to implement are great policies and they're absolutely in the best interests of America, even if you think that, the damage that is being done now is irreparable, because you're the whole of the government's a fiction. Like when we talk about the Constitution, or we talk about like in any country, right? I'm not talking about America, and we're talking about like what is legislation, like what is the law? It's just a fiction. It's just the only reason it holds any merit at all is because we all kind of agree that we're going to be bound by it, right? And the moment people collectively stop accepting that you'll be bound by the rules of the land in which you live, then it's not the law anymore. It's just this piece of paper that says you can't do something that no one listens to. So America, I think, is sort of this is not my area of like expertise, or I don't have a particular interest in cross-cultural constitutional systems of government. But America's sort of one of the first movers to move to a system of government like this, like a modern democracy, which is
the American experiment.
The American, and it has worked, right? I mean, it's got a lot of flaws, but it has worked, and it's delivered prosperity for Americans. And in the space of how many weeks? Maybe starting, maybe
someone say he never left.
Well, maybe 2020 was, when he didn't concede power is maybe like, that's a pretty big one too. But like this stuff, this is like when I was talking about institutions, this is what I was talking about. You might say on the one hand, oh, well, yeah, but like the system will work. You'll have the courts that will, and of course it'll be found to be like illegal or whatever. But like this sort of bulldozering like through this doesn't happen like in a vacuum. Like there are like every action has an equal opposite reaction, and there are feedback loops that happen. So the court will say, well, we don't want to be shown to be impotent, so we will kind of make our decisions to make Trump happy, but that kind of demonstrates that yes, we do have our judicial, like our power is still protected. But like you still have this, they've conceded.
Yeah.
And I guess just the final thing to say is that, like I read, in the last year or so, a couple of Donald Trump oriented books, and including a pretty good biography on him. And this is like his whole, this is his approach. He's always done this. Like in business, he's done this. It's just like, keep pushing them. It doesn't matter if you act contrary to the law, because if the other party can't fight you in the courts, you can act illegally. You don't need to. You don't need to worry about that stuff. And that's his approach. It's exactly what he's doing now. Only he's got aides and enablers who are helping him do it.
I mean, you've got to say that his team this time are a lot more focused and energized, right? They've had a lot of time to plan this, right? Like, and I think that's the jarring nature of it, that you've got someone who's really chaotic like Trump and shoots. He's very instinctual. He goes on vibe. But then you do have this machine that's been planning his return for a while, right? Like if you believe that he's gotten as much as he's gotten done in the last 4 or 5 weeks without this massive machine, then you're dreaming, right? Like they are working around the clock to get these things out. It's at a ferocious pace. No one can keep up, right? There's a lot of like management consulting kind of practices I'm seeing to get this stuff out. Even the 1 minute rap videos from the press, right? Like it's a different game. It's a different team, and it's definitely got more teeth this time, right? In terms of the output, and it's definitely not Trump. He's already played golf like 6 times since he took office. This is he's got the team now. He's got the horsepower. What I would say just quickly too is with the whole Doge thing, I have a little bit more time for that, because I think that when it comes to looking at certain bureaucracies and government efficiency, that there aren't that many ways to do it properly. Like I think that sometimes you do need to, as Elon would say, move fast and break things. And I do think there's probably in some of these organizations there's enough scope to do that, right? Like you know that there'd be a lot of fat in some of those areas, right? Like I think that, and if you pick the right ones, like you're not talking about Medicaid and people's payments and stuff like that, some of this can be healthy, I believe.
Let me tell you why you're wrong. You're wrong because this isn't the question of like, is it a good thing for government to be some percentage like smaller than it is now? Like that's the question you just answered, right? But that's not what's going on. What's going on is let's like do all of these really stupid things to cut the wrong areas just to meet some arbitrary like aspirational cut, right? And
how do you know they're the wrong areas?
Because you have essentially a personnel reduction program that says, hey, if you don't want to be in the government, put your hand up. We'll give you whatever the payout figure is, and you can leave. Who leaves? The best people, the best capability, like you, people with opportunity elsewhere outside of government. They're the ones putting their hands up for it. And you know what else? They might be the only people in government who can do a certain thing. You need to decide where you need to cut first. You need to decide where the fat is. This is the equivalent of like, I want to lose 10 kilograms. So what I'm going to do is stop eating and lose all my muscle. Like that's essentially like what I'm going to stop, like that's what's happening. That's the approach. I can tell you what, Elon Musk doesn't understand government and he doesn't know where the fat is. He is the wrong person to be doing this.
I think a bit of this common trope about when you have mass redundancies that all the good people leave. I don't think that's true.
It's true. Do you know who else leaves? People who are about to retire. People who that is always what happens.
They're the ones that they want to flush out, right? Like I think that people are
and they're hanging on. And do you know why they hang on? Because they're waiting for a redundancy. Like that's the only reason they haven't retired yet already. Like it's a dumb move. It's a dumb call. It's a bad idea. And
so just enlighten me then if I'm wrong. What's the alternative?
Okay, do you know what you do? You say, all right, we're going to have a 6-month commission of audit. We're going to engage every part of government, root and branch. We're going to go through and we're actually going to review spending and it's going to be a bottom up process. You're going to have people coming to you telling you what can be cut. Imagine a universe where you've got this big bureaucracy that you don't understand. You can't understand it because it's so complex. And let's say you've made a decision. Well, we need to cut it by 10% or maybe 20%, whatever that figure is. The bureaucracy is so complex. You can't possibly, from Elon Musk's level, decide which part has to be trimmed, right? So you say to all of the executives within the bureaucracy, you say, all right, you've got a budget. You need to deliver me. You need to hand to me 10% savings, and you've got to tell me. We're going to do this over a 6-month period.
It just doesn't work like that, though. You need to change the culture.
This is not changing the culture.
Oh, it'll change the culture.
No, it won't. Because do you know why? Because the government is not fucking SpaceX or Tesla.
I agree. It's not SpaceX or Tesla. And, like there's that line going around that Elon's used to having customers and the government has citizens, right? So you can't treat them the same. And some of these skill sets don't translate too well when there are real people, There's a duty of care here. But I disagree that these, asking these kind of heterodox thinking of, we just go through it bottom up, and they try that. They always do that. And there's this, the system protects itself.
That's a soft budget constraint problem. That's not the approach is wrong. The reason that doesn't always work is because do you know what actually happens? They go through that process and then the advice to government of the government of the day is, yeah, we can cut this thing, but you realize this program that your community cares about is going to have to be cut. And then do you know what happens? The politician goes, oh, actually, I don't want that to happen. And then they'd end up not cutting it. That's what happens. So you draw out the trade-offs, you draw out the consequences of cutting certain things, and then suddenly you have this realization, oh, actually, we do need that thing. We do need that service, because if we don't have that service, we're going to have a problem. But the problem is with this crash and burn approach or slash and burn rather, that Elon Musk is like pursuing, is that there's no weighing of consequences. He doesn't even know what the consequences are, and that's.
Well, yeah, I mean, he knows that the condoms won't arrive in the third world country.
And what does he care? What does he care? He's a billionaire. He doesn't need anything the government provides. So
yeah, I don't agree. I think that if you keep on doing the same things, like this is one of those areas that I think that you do need a different approach, and I've got space for that. We're not talking about people's payments here.
Well, we are talking about payments that aren't being made because of dumbass decisions made by Donald Trump. We are talking about people's lives being impacted because a payment has not been made. We are talking about payments not being made. This is literally what we're talking about.
Were you talking about USA Aid?
No, I'm talking about people who, for example, are part of cancer test treatments that are funded by programs that Elon Musk is cutting. So this is having a real world impact on people, and it will continue. And the fact that you can't connect .A to .B, the fact that you cut it without even knowing what the consequences are, how can you defend that? Roger, how can you defend that?
I do. I'll double down on it because, even in my career, I've seen so much waste that, and you think that the way that you're painting out government, Andy, is that everything is calculated and everything's analysed. And
it's not, but you have to analyse it before you cut it. You can't just why don't we just say, well, all right, let's just get rid of every second building in the government. That you may as well just do that. Why do you need the Department of Government Efficiency? Why, if your goal is to cut government expenditure by 25%, why don't you just fire, just have a random lottery and just say, do it that way, because it will save everyone a lot of time. So how can you defend? That's essentially what's going on now. We've essentially got a random lottery. There's no thoughtfulness.
Yeah, if
Elon Musk was being thoughtful, he would be doing a 6-month, 12-month review of expenditure and being thoughtful about it. He's not doing that. So what we've got is a lottery. So what I'm hearing from you is a message that I've got time for a lottery. I've got a time for random cutting and spending without thinking about it first.
I don't think it's a lottery, though. We don't know. I mean, part of the problem is we don't know what he's doing. There's not that full transparency yet. But look, I think in Elon's style, he will provide that transparency, and maybe we can pick over that later. But you just with these kind of organizations and the waste and the incumbency and the way that the system protects itself.
It's not the solution. So because a problem exists,
you get nothing done then, right?
Yeah, but because a problem exists, okay, so you're identifying a problem. I'm not disagreeing that that's not a problem. Once organizations get big, they tend to get bureaucratic and inefficient. So I would accept that. Not that I'm that familiar with their system, but it seems plausible, right? So I'll grant you that. But what we're talking about is the solution. We're not talking about whether there's a problem or not. So a lot of what you've said so far is pointing to the fact that there's a problem, and therefore but then you make the jump, therefore that that justifies everything that's going on. But that's the jump that I think that I'm throwing out there. The N word, the other N word, naive. That's the bit that I think's naive. I think that.
No, I mean I hear what you're saying, Andy, but have you ever heard of email bankruptcy? Basically, it's a situation where your email, whether you come back from leave or you just have a hectic incident, and there is such a large amount of unread emails in your inbox that you say, can't deal with this, I'm just going to delete all. And I'm going to trust that the most important messages will repeat themselves or will make their way back to me in a fresh inbox. And like I said, you could say, well, there's going to be a lot of important emails that you delete, right? But at the same time, you've made a certain landscape where now you have to focus on what's the most immediate things, and you may have a period of reactivity, but then it will balance out over time. I'm just saying that there's some approaches that kind of need that, because if you try to trawl your way through the tens of thousands of emails, then it's just, you won't get it done. And on average, for some environments, that is a strategy. And I don't think it is crude as what you're saying, where you just Hunger Games, every second person just gets a letter under their desk.
Two comments in reaction to that. First is that approach you've just spoke to about let your inbox leave it and go to a new one. That might be okay, where the consequences of missing something important are next to zero, right? But when you're the government, you're doing very consequential things, and it's important for a lot of different reasons. So that's the first part of my reaction there, that almost the irresponsibility of doing that. Unfortunately, the risk tolerance is much lower in government. Second point in response to that is I'm not opposed to, dismantling something so you rebuild. Okay, so I'm not opposed to we need to crash this thing so we can build it from the ground up. And I think that's if I get you, that's the essence of, I think, why you're sympathetic to the Doge thing and the Elon Musk thing. But that's not really what's going on. You've got to, to do that, you've got to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. I don't think that's I don't think that's the case. I don't think they know what they're doing.
Maybe not. I'm not going to defend the whole approach, but all I'm saying is that sometimes when it comes to efficiency targets, you have to change the culture, and sometimes the only way to change the culture is to break it like slightly, to kind of threaten the core of it, and that leaves an environment. So say like with X, right, when he came in, and again, I know it's not the government, but he came into X and he just slashed everything.
It hasn't been successful though, has it?
No, but
it's been personally
again,
successful for him in terms of
success
influence,
for him,
but not commercially for X.
But people said the whole platform would die, right, with such severe cuts, and you'd be left with just a bunch of logs to deal with, right? Under this thing of like no one will stay that's any good. But from what reports are, he has a crack squad of engineers
of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who don't know shit
because
about anything.
Because the culture has changed, right? He's kind of attracting this kind of talent that are thinking about.
They're not talent, man. There's no talent. I mean, these are.
So I'm talking about X here now. I'm not talking about big balls and Doge. I just love the thing that like this guy's handle, big balls. Now everyone in the mainstream media has to use the word big balls.
Look, as I said, 6 months ago, we're having a conversation about the impact of Trump on institutions, and that's basically what's happened. And I'm going to say now, I told you so then, and I'm going to say I'm going to tell you so in 6 months. This is going to be an absolute unmitigated disaster.
That won't make you happy if it actually does happen. But we're not there yet, right? This is the very beginning of the story.
That's what's so scary about it. This is the beginning.
Sometimes it's like, if it doesn't hurt, you're not doing it right.
I just think with what's going on, it is not a thoughtful process. It's a clash of cultures too. It's like and it's quite disrespectful to those who work in government, for someone outside of government to think they know everything about what it takes to run government successfully, because the people within government, they get it through government because they there's a different. It's like saying, "Oh well, I'm a great French speaker," and then that great French speaker thinking they can tell the Italian speaker how to speak Italian. They're different beasts. And just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're good at the other. And the challenge here, and I think I've picked up a little bit of this today with some of what you've said. I think that certainly if we were talking about a corporate setting, that may be true. But it just isn't true within the bureaucracy, because bureaucracies are and they're called bureaucracies for a reason, because they're slow moving things. They're these beasts. Now you would say, oh yeah, but that's why you need to go at it. But they build up these features and buttons over time, and you can't just come in and dismantle them. If you are going to do that, you have to do it properly, because if you don't do it properly, a whole lot of shit isn't going to be done properly in the interim. You've got to build up over time something.
This is unfortunately this is the mandate, right? So it's gotten to a stage.
I don't know that it is. I think the mandate is more, let's make the price of eggs a bit cheaper, and we've seen inflation figures in the US.
This will be very popular, Andy, and it will continue to be, because everyone.
I think it'll be popular up until people's services and payments will be cut.
Yeah, maybe,
and that's going to happen. So
maybe, but they're also again, USA aid and stuff. That's going outside the country. And what they lose in soft power and whatever, that's not perceivable on the domestic scale initially, right? So I just think that people love seeing the waste, right? They love the entertainment value of it. It'll be very popular, and that's why the Democrats aren't doing anything about it.
Yeah, well, the irony is waste until waste is actually the service that you, or the money that you receive, that's cut. So all right, well, we'll see what happens next week. All right, catch you later.
Right.
Today begins the new Israel. Today, we are all united as one. Shakam Balada.
Now, let us celebrate under one symbol.
The party is is officially underway. Jews, Christians, and Muslims have united, ushering in 10 years of Van Halen. Out in the crowd, people are celebrating like never before. To the core! No doubt Israel is the happiest, rockinest place to be.